A little girl sees a millionaire man crying at his mother's grave. He says 2 words and she turns pale. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The cool autumn breeze swept through Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, rustling the golden leaves that had begun to fall. The sky was a dull gray, mirroring the heavy weight in Lily's small chest as she walked along the cobblestone path. She carried a bouquet of wild flowers, carefully picked from vacant lots near the shelter where she'd spent the previous night. The stems were wrapped in a piece of newspaper, a makeshift vase that was coming undone in her nervous grip. It had been exactly 1 year since her mother had passed away. Though time had dulled the initial shock, grief and loneliness still clung to Lily like a shadow. At 7 years old, she had learned to hide her tears, to stay quiet, to make herself invisible when necessary. These skills had served her well in the shelters and temporary homes she'd drifted through since her mother's death. As she approached the familiar grave marker, Lily slowed her steps. Someone was already there, a man in an expensive suit, kneeling before her mother's headstone. His broad shoulders were slumped, his head bowed as he placed a bouquet of white lilies at the base of the stone. Lily hesitated, clutching her wildflowers tighter. Who was this stranger at her mother's grave? In the years since the funeral, she'd never seen anyone else visit. Her mother, Emily, had always said it was just the 2 of them against the world. The man didn't notice her at first. She watched as he wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, heard the soft sound of his muffled sobs. There was something so private about his grief that Lily almost turned away. But this was her mother, her special day to remember her. Gathering her courage, she stepped forward. "What are you doing at my mom's grave?" she asked, her voice small, but clear in the cemetery silence. The man startled, turning toward her with red-rimmed eyes. He was handsome in a stern way, with dark hair graying at the temples and a face that looked like it rarely smiled. For a moment he seemed confused by her presence, blinking as if she might be a ghost. "Your mom?" he finally said, his voice hoarse, with emotion. Lily nodded, pointing to the headstone. "Emily Wilson, that's my mom." The man's face paled as he stared at her, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. He stood slowly, towering over her small frame, his expensive coat fluttering in the breeze. "That's not possible," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Then, louder. "Emily Reynolds was my wife." Lily felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Wife? Her mother had never been married, had never mentioned a husband. It was always just the 2 of them, moving from place to place, never staying long anywhere. "You're lying," she said, taking a step back. "My mom didn't have a husband." The man looked as shaken as she felt, his gaze moving between Lily and the headstone where the name, Emily Wilson Reynolds, was etched in elegant script. A name Lily had never seen in its complete form before. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Lily," she said, lifting her chin despite her trembling lips. "Lily Wilson. And I don't know who you are, but that's my mom." The stranger looked at her as if seeing a ghost, his face a mask of confusion and pain. "I'm David Reynolds," he said finally, "and I think we both have a lot of questions." David stood there, the crisp autumn wind brushing against his face as he looked down at Lily. She wasn't crying anymore, but her small frame still trembled slightly in the chilly air. He had spent his entire life negotiating high-stakes deals, making multi-million-dollar decisions without a second thought. Yet here he was, frozen because of a little girl who claimed to be his wife's daughter. It didn't make sense. None of it did. Emily had never mentioned having a child, never once spoken about a daughter outside their marriage. But as David stared at Lily, he couldn't ignore the overwhelming feeling that she was telling the truth. There was something in her eyes, Emily's eyes, that couldn't be fabricated. "I don't understand," he said finally, his voice softer than before. "Emily and I were married for 8 years. She never told me she had a daughter." Lily clutched her wildflowers tighter, her knuckles turning white. "And she never told me she had a husband," she replied, her voice small but defiant. They stood in painful silence, two strangers connected by a woman who had apparently kept them secret from each other. David noticed Lily's thin jacket, the worn-out shoes on her small feet, the tired circles under her eyes. She looked exhausted, as if she hadn't slept properly in days. "Where do you live, Lily?" he asked carefully. She hesitated, looking down at the ground. "Different places. I move around a lot." A cold realization settled over him. If she had no stable home, where had she been since Emily died? The thought made his stomach twist. "Who takes care of you?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Lily shrugged, the gesture heartbreakingly adult for someone so young. "I take care of myself mostly. Sometimes people help for a while." David exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold air. The businesslike approach to crisis that had served him throughout his career kicked in, pushing aside his shock and confusion. Whatever was happening here, he couldn't leave this child, Emily's child, alone in a cemetery with night approaching and temperatures dropping. "Have you eaten today?" he asked. Lily looked up, surprised by the question. She shook her head slightly. "There's a diner just outside the cemetery," he said, pointing toward the gates. "Emily used to like it. We could get something to eat and talk." He half expected her to refuse, to run away from this stranger claiming to be her mother's husband. Instead, after a moment's consideration, she nodded. "I'm hungry," she admitted. As they walked side by side down the winding cemetery path, David's mind raced with questions. How had Emily maintained two separate lives? Where had she told Lily she was going when she was with him? Who was Emily Wilson, and how did she differ from the Emily Reynolds he thought he knew? The diner was warm and busy, a welcome contrast to the cemetery's somber quiet. The hostess seated them in a corner booth, eyeing them curiously. The well-dressed businessman and the disheveled child made an odd pair. "Order whatever you like," David told Lily as she studied the menu with careful attention. "Can I have pancakes?" she asked, her voice tentative, as if expecting him to change his mind. "Of course." When their food arrived, David watched as Lily ate with the focused determination of someone who didn't know when her next meal would come. Each bite revealed something new about her life. The careful way she cut her pancakes into small, manageable pieces, how she sipped her water between bites to make it last. "Lily," he said gently when she had slowed down, "I need to understand what's happening here. Where have you been living since your mother died?" She set down her fork, suddenly guarded. "Different places, shelters sometimes. Last night I stayed at Good Shepherd on 4th Avenue. David felt something tighten in his chest. Anger, guilt, sorrow. He couldn't tell which. While he had been grieving in his empty brownstone for the past year, this child, who might be his stepdaughter, had been homeless. "What about other family?" he asked. "Grandparents, aunts or uncles?" Lily shook her head. "Mom always said it was just us, that we only had each other." The same thing Emily had told him about her own background, another lie in what was becoming a web of deception. "Lily," David said, meeting her eyes across the table, "I don't know what's going on yet, but I promise you this. You won't be sleeping in a shelter tonight." David barely slept that night, his mind tangled with thoughts he couldn't escape. The guest bedroom down the hall, which had stood empty since Emily's death, now housed a little girl who had turned his world upside down. After dinner, he had brought Lily to his brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, the decision made impulsively, but with conviction. He couldn't let Emily's daughter, if she truly was Emily's daughter, spend another night in a shelter. But now, staring at the ceiling as dawn approached, the full weight of the situation pressed against his chest. Had his entire marriage been a lie? How had Emily maintained two separate lives? And what was he supposed to do with a child he never knew existed? The sound of tentative footsteps in the hallway pulled him from his thoughts. He rose quickly, throwing on a robe over his pajamas. When he opened his bedroom door, he found Lily standing there, looking small and uncertain in the oversized t-shirt he'd given her to sleep in. "I couldn't find the bathroom," she said quietly. "Second door on the right," David replied, pointing down the hall. She nodded and disappeared in that direction. David ran a hand through his hair, sighing deeply. He moved to the kitchen, deciding to make coffee. He needed clarity, and caffeine seemed like a reasonable first step. By the time Lily emerged again, David had eggs and toast waiting. She approached the kitchen island cautiously, climbing onto a stool with careful movements. "You made breakfast?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. "It's not much," David admitted. "I'm not much of a cook." "Mom wasn't either," Lily said, picking up a piece of toast. "We ate a lot of cereal." The casual mention of Emily sent a jolt through David. This was his opportunity to understand more about the woman he thought he knew. "Lily," he began carefully, sitting across from her, "I need to ask you some questions about your mom, about Emily." Lily studied him for a moment before nodding. "Okay, but then I get to ask you questions too." David couldn't help but smile slightly at her negotiation tactics. "That seems fair. What do you want to know?" she asked, taking a bite of eggs. "Where did you and your mom live?" Lily shrugged. "Lots of places. We moved a lot. Mom said it was because of her work, but we never stayed anywhere more than a few months." "And what kind of work did she do?" "She restored paintings, fixed them when they got old or damaged. Sometimes she worked at museums, sometimes for private people." David's heart clenched. That part at least was true. Emily had been an art conservator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a fact he could verify. "Did she ever mention me?" he asked, the question that had been burning inside him all night. Lily shook her head. "No, she never said she was married. It was always just us." David took a sip of his coffee, using the moment to compose himself. "When would she disappear? Were there regular times she wasn't with you?" 3 days a week. Sometimes 4, Lily said matter-of-factly. "Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. She said she had to work late those days, so I stayed with Mrs. Garrett from the apartment next door." The days aligned perfectly with when Emily had told David she was working late, at the museum or volunteering at shelters. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His wife had constructed an elaborate double life with carefully crafted explanations for her absences on both sides. "My turn," Lily said, interrupting his thoughts. "How did you meet my mom?" David took a deep breath, focusing on the simple facts rather than the emotions swirling beneath them. "At the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I was there for a fundraiser and she was working late in the conservation studio. We literally bumped into each other in the hallway." "Were you really married?" Lily asked, her next question coming quickly. "Yes," David said softly. 8 years. We had a small ceremony at City Hall, then a reception at our favorite restaurant." "Did you love her?" The directness of the question caught David off guard. He looked into Lily's eyes, so similar to Emily's, and couldn't bring himself to be anything but honest. "Very much," he said. "I thought I knew everything about her." Lily nodded, seeming to accept his answer. "So did I." In that moment, a fragile connection formed between them. Two people struggling to reconcile their memories of Emily with the growing evidence that she had been a stranger to them both. "What happens now?" Lily asked, her voice small but steady. It was the question David had been asking himself all night, with no clear answer in sight. "For now," he said, "you'll stay here while I try to figure things out. Is that okay with you, Lily?" Glanced around the spacious kitchen, then back at David. After a moment's consideration, she nodded. "It's better than the shelter." David wasn't used to having someone else in the house. His mornings typically began with coffee and financial news. Emails checked before sunrise, meetings scheduled back-to-back with military precision. But today he found himself in a department store, standing awkwardly in the children's section while a saleswoman helped Lily select clothing. "She needs everything," he had told the woman shortly after the store opened. "School clothes, pajamas, proper shoes." The saleswoman had given him a curious look but asked no questions about the disheveled child accompanying this clearly wealthy man. Lily approached clothing with the same careful consideration she seemed to give everything, examining tags, checking prices, selecting only the most practical items. When David encouraged her to choose things she actually liked, not just needed, she seemed genuinely confused. "This is enough," she said, holding a small stack of basics. "What about this?" David asked, holding up a purple sweater with a subtle sparkle thread woven through it. Lily hesitated, then shook her head. "It's not practical." Something about her response, so adult, so measured, made David's chest tighten. What kind of life had forced a 7-year-old to worry about practicality over joy? "We're getting it anyway," he said, adding it to the pile despite her protests. By midday, they had purchased not just clothes but also a backpack, school supplies, and toiletries. David had called his assistant from the car, instructing her to research nearby elementary schools and arrange for immediate enrollment. If Lily was going to stay with him even temporarily, she needed structure, stability, education. As they drove back to his brownstone, David glanced at Lily in the rearview mirror. She sat quietly in the back seat, staring out the window at the passing city, her small hand occasionally reaching up to touch the collar of her new coat, as if she couldn't quite believe it was hers. "Are you okay back there?" he asked. She nodded without looking away from the window. "Why are you doing all this?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "Buying me stuff. Looking for schools." Now she turned to meet his eyes in the mirror. "You don't even know me." David considered his answer carefully. "You're Emily's daughter. That makes you important to me, even if I just found out about you." "But she lied to you." "About me?" "Yes," David admitted, his grip tightening slightly on the steering wheel. "She did, but that's not your fault." When they arrived home, David helped Lily put away her new clothes in the guest room, now her room, at least for the foreseeable future. He watched as she carefully arranged each item, handling them with a reverence that spoke volumes about her previous scarcity. "I have some work calls to make," he said when they were finished. "Will you be okay on your own for a bit? There are books in the living room if you get bored." Lily nodded, and David retreated to his home office, closing the door behind him. The first call wasn't work-related at all. It was to a private investigator he sometimes used for vetting business partners. "I need information on an Emily Wilson, also known as Emily Reynolds," he explained, keeping his voice low. "Specifically, I need to verify her background, employment history, financial records, anything that might explain how she maintained 2 separate identities." "Sounds complicated," the investigator commented. "This related to business?" "It's personal," David said firmly, "and confidential." After ending the call, David sat at his desk, staring at the framed photograph of Emily that had occupied the same spot since her death. Her smile, once a source of comfort, now seemed enigmatic, concealing secrets he was only beginning to uncover. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Lily standing there, holding a leather-bound photo album he recognized immediately. The wedding album Emily had painstakingly assembled, filled with candid shots from their courthouse ceremony and intimate reception. "I found this," Lily said, her expression unreadable. "It's really her. With you." David nodded, stepping aside to let her enter the office. "Yes. That's our wedding day." Lily sat in one of the chairs opposite his desk, carefully turning the pages of the album. "She looks happy," she observed quietly. "She was," David said, sitting beside her rather than behind his desk. "At least I thought she was." Lily traced a finger over Emily's smiling face in one of the photos. "She was happy with me too," she said, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "Even though we didn't have all this." David felt the implied criticism but couldn't fault her for it. The contrast between his life with Emily and hers was stark. "I believe you," he said gently. "Your mother was complicated, it seems, but I never doubted her capacity for love." For the first time since they'd met, Lily's expression softened slightly. "Me neither." It wasn't much, this fragile moment of shared understanding, but as they sat together looking at photographs of a woman who had connected and deceived them, both, David felt it was at least a beginning. "She's definitely Emily's daughter." the private investigator confirmed over the phone 3 days later. Birth certificate lists Emily Wilson as the mother. No father listed. David paced his office, processing this information while keeping his voice low. Lily was in the living room working on assignments from her new school where she'd started the day before. What about Emily's background? Did you find anything unusual? That's putting it mildly, the investigator replied. Emily Wilson appears to have existed only in fragments before 10 years ago. Driver's license, social security number, all legitimate but with minimal history. It's like she created this identity shortly before Lily was born. And Emily Reynolds? That identity has a more substantial paper trail, though I'm still digging. The marriage license to you is legitimate. Employment records at the museum check out. But there are irregularities in her financial history. Regular cash withdrawals, always on Mondays, between $500–700 each time. David closed his eyes, leaning against his desk. Money for Lily, for their other life together. Her death certificate lists the cause as heart failure, the investigator continued. Medical records show she had a congenital heart condition she never disclosed to her doctors until it was too late. Refused treatment multiple times in the months before her death. She never told me about any heart problems, David said, the revelation hitting him hard. Why would she refuse treatment? Can't answer that. But there's something else. She had a safe deposit box at Midtown Federal. As her husband, you should be able to access it. After ending the call, David stood motionless, trying to reconcile these new discoveries with the woman he thought he knew. Why create a dual identity? Why hide a heart condition? What else had Emily concealed? The sound of Lily's footsteps in the hallway pulled him from his thoughts. She appeared in the doorway, homework clutched in one hand. I need help with math, she said hesitantly, still not entirely comfortable asking him for anything. David welcomed the distraction. Let's see what we're dealing with. They sat at the dining room table working through multiplication problems together. Lily was bright, picking up concepts quickly despite her disrupted education. David found himself impressed by her persistence. When faced with difficult problems, she never gave up, just kept trying different approaches until something worked. You're good at this, he told her when they finished. Lily shrugged, but he caught the small smile she tried to hide. Mom helped me when she could, but she said she wasn't good at math. That's true, David agreed, remembering how Emily always joked about being artistically, not mathematically inclined. This small consistency between their experiences of her felt strangely reassuring. Did she ever mention where she grew up? David asked carefully. Or talk about her childhood? Lily considered the question. She said she moved around a lot. When she was young, that's why we did too. She hesitated, then added, sometimes she seemed scared, like we were running from something. David's interest sharpened. Did she say what she was afraid of? No, but sometimes she'd see something on the news or pass someone on the street, and she'd get really quiet. Then we'd move again. This was new information, not just a double life, but a life characterized by fear. It didn't align with the confident, composed Emily he had known. Lily, he said gently, I'm trying to understand your mom better. Our lives with her were very different. Would it be okay if we went through her things together? Maybe we could both learn more about her. Lily nodded slowly. I don't have much of hers, just some photos and her locket. Locket? She gave it to me before she died. Said to keep it safe and never take it off. Lily pulled a thin silver chain from beneath her shirt, revealing a small heart-shaped locket. It doesn't open, though. I've tried. David leaned closer, examining the delicate piece of jewelry. He had never seen Emily wear it, but something about it seemed familiar. May I? He asked, reaching out cautiously. Lily hesitated, then lifted the chain over her head, placing the locket in his palm. David turned it over, noting a small engraving on the back. Always protect what matters most. The words sent a chill through him, reinforcing his growing suspicion that Emily's deceptions weren't capricious but calculated, perhaps even necessary. I think, he said, returning the locket to Lily. "We need to find out what your mother was protecting you from." Her eyes widened slightly. "You believe me? That she was scared?" "I do," David said, realizing he meant it. "And I think it's time we discovered why." Midtown Federal Bank was housed in an imposing stone building that made Lily crane her neck as they approached. David hadn't planned to bring her along for this errand, but his newly hired nanny had called in sick, and something in him rebelled against leaving Lily with yet another unfamiliar caretaker. "This won't take long," he promised as they entered the marble-floored lobby. "Just stay close." Lily nodded, clearly intimidated by the grand surroundings but trying not to show it. She had dressed carefully that morning in one of her new outfits, her hair neatly brushed as if preparing for an important occasion. The locket hung visibly around her neck, a talisman she hadn't taken off since their conversation the previous day. The bank manager greeted David by name, eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of Lily, but asking no questions. After reviewing David's identification and marriage certificate, he led them to a private room where the safe deposit box awaited. "I'll give you privacy," the manager said, closing the door behind him. The metal box sat on a table between them, unremarkable yet somehow ominous. David hesitated, feeling like he was about to cross a boundary Emily had deliberately established. But he needed answers. They both did. "Ready?" he asked Lily. She nodded, moving closer to the table as David inserted the key and lifted the lid. Inside lay several neatly organized items: a manila envelope, a small velvet pouch, a USB drive, and a handwritten letter addressed simply to David. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the letter. Emily's familiar handwriting covered the page, elegant yet hurried as if written under pressure. "David," it began, "if you're reading this, something has happened to me and my worst fears may be realized. I'm sorry for the secrets I've kept from you. Please know that every moment we shared was real, even if parts of my life remained hidden. The enclosed documents will explain everything. The most important thing to understand is that my name was not always Emily. Before we met, I witnessed something I shouldn't have. My testimony put dangerous people in prison, and I entered witness protection. I became Emily Wilson, living quietly, until I felt safe enough to build a life, with Lily, and later with you. I created separate worlds because I couldn't risk connecting you to my past. If they found me, they might harm anyone close to me. Keeping you apart from Lily was the only way I knew to keep you both safe. I've recently learned that the man I testified against is being released early. If something happens to me, Lily will need protection. The USB drive contains evidence that should keep him imprisoned if delivered to the right people. I never meant to hurt you, David. Loving you was the most honest thing in my complicated life. Please forgive me. Emily." David set the letter down, his mind reeling. Witness protection, criminal threats, it was like something from a film, not the life of the art conservator he had married. "What does it say?" Lily asked quietly. David looked at her, this child who had already endured so much loss and uncertainty, and struggled with how much to share. "It says your mom was very brave," he finally replied, "and that she kept secrets to protect us, both." Lily considered this, then pointed to the remaining items. "What else is there?" David opened the manila envelope first, finding documents that confirmed everything in Emily's letter. Her original name had been Sarah Cassidy. She had witnessed a murder committed by Victor Kozlov, head of a money laundering operation with ties to organized crime. Her testimony had helped convict him, but his organization had remained partly intact, with associates who maintained loyalty to their imprisoned leader. The velvet pouch contained a key with a numerical code etched into it, its purpose unclear, and the USB drive, when David briefly plugged it into his phone, appeared to contain encrypted files that required specialized software to access. "I don't understand all of this yet," David told Lily honestly. "But I think your mom, our Emily, was much more complicated than either of us knew." "Is that why we moved so much?" Lily asked. "Because bad people were looking for her?" David nodded slowly. "It seems that way. Lily's small face hardened with a determination that seemed too mature for her years. Then we need to finish what she started. We need to keep the bad people away. Looking at her steady gaze, at the locket that contained who knew what secrets, David felt a fierce protectiveness surge through him. Emily had died trying to keep her daughter safe. Whatever came next, he wouldn't let her sacrifice be in vain. We will, he promised, gathering the items back into the box. Together, Viktor Kozlov is being released next week, David's security consultant confirmed, his face grim on the video call. After serving 8 years of a 15-year sentence, good behavior and overcrowding, the usual excuses, David paced his home office, glancing occasionally at the door to ensure Lily couldn't. Over here. She was in the living room working on a school project, but her uncanny ability to move silently through the house had surprised him more than once. What kind of threat does he pose? David asked. Significant. Kozlov maintained influence even from prison. His organization is diminished but still operational, and he's not someone who forgives or forgets. The consultant paused. The evidence you mentioned on the USB drive could be valuable, but we need to access it first. I'm working on that, David said. He had hired a cybersecurity expert to decrypt the files, but it was taking time. What about immediate security concerns? I've already increased surveillance around your home and Lily's school. I'd recommend relocating temporarily once Kozlov is released, at least until we understand his intentions. After ending the call, David sat heavily in his desk chair, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. In just 2 weeks, his life had transformed completely. From grieving widower to protective guardian of a child he was still getting to know, facing threats from a criminal organization he hadn't known existed until days ago. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Lily stood in the doorway, a sheet of construction paper in her hand. I finished my family tree project, she said, approaching his desk hesitantly. But I don't know what to do about the empty spaces. David looked at the colorful diagram. Lily had written her name at the bottom with Emily's above it, but the rest remained blank. The spaces for father, grandparents, and extended family yawned empty, a visual representation of all Emily had kept hidden. Can I help? He asked, gesturing for her to sit. Lily climbed onto the chair across from him. The teacher said everyone's tree will be different, but mine feels too empty. David studied the project, considering how to handle this delicate situation. Well, we know your mom's real name was Sarah Cassidy. We could add that. Lily nodded, carefully writing the name, alongside Emily Wilson. What about you? She asked suddenly. Where do you go on the tree? The question caught David off guard. I'm not sure, he admitted. I was married to your mom, but I'm not your biological father. But you're taking care of me now, Lily pointed out with simple logic. Isn't that what fathers do? Something tightened in David's chest, a strange mixture of responsibility, affection, and lingering grief. Yes, I suppose it is. So can I put you here? She pointed to the empty space labeled Father. David hesitated, aware of the significance of what she was asking. Are you sure that's what you want? Lily nodded, her expression serious. You're the only one I have. Those 6 words, spoken so matter-of-factly, shifted something fundamental in David's perception. Until now, he had been acting out of obligation to Emily's memory, out of basics, human decency toward a child in need. But Lily's simple statement illuminated a deeper truth. They were connected now, bound by more than just Emily's deception. They needed each other. Okay, he said softly. You can put me there, as Lily carefully wrote David Reynolds in the father space. A noise from outside caught David's attention. A car slowing down in front of the house, unusual for their quiet street. He moved to the window, tension tightening his shoulders, and watched a black sedan pull to a stop across the street. Is something wrong? Lily asked, noticing his sudden alertness. Probably nothing, David said, trying to keep his voice casual even as alarm bells rang in his mind. The car remained idling, its windows tinted too darkly to see inside. Why don't you finish your project in the kitchen? I'll make us some hot chocolate. Once Lily was safely away from the windows, David texted his security team about the suspicious vehicle. Within minutes, one of his guards replied that they were observing the car and would intervene if necessary. The sedan remained for 20 more minutes before finally driving away. But the message was clear. They were being watched. Time was running out to decipher Emily's files and understand exactly what she had been protecting. That night, after tucking Lily into bed, David made a decision. They couldn't wait any longer. They needed to leave the brownstone and move somewhere secure until Emily's evidence could be properly analyzed and delivered to the authorities. "We're going on a trip," he told Lily the next morning over breakfast. "Somewhere safe." To his surprise, she simply nodded as if she had been expecting this. "Because of the bad people?" "Yes," David admitted, seeing no point in shielding her from a danger she already intuitively understood. "But I promise you, Lily, no one is going to hurt you. Not while I'm here." She studied him for a long moment before replying, "I believe you." The safe house was a modern apartment in a secure building in Midtown, with views of the city skyline that would normally have impressed visitors. But Lily merely glanced at the panoramic windows before turning her attention to exploring the unfamiliar space. Her small backpack clutched in her hands, David watched her methodical inspection, checking doors, windows, closets, and recognized the behavior of someone accustomed to assessing new environments for safety. "It's a nice place," he said, setting down their bags. "And very secure." Lily nodded, completing her circuit of the apartment before returning to stand near him. "How long will we stay here?" "I'm not sure," David answered honestly. "A few days at least. My security team will keep an eye on the brownstone, see if anyone tries to approach it." "What about school?" "I've arranged for your assignments to be sent here. We'll make it work." Lily accepted this with the same quiet resilience she brought to every disruption. At 7 years old, she had already experienced more upheaval than most adults, yet she adapted with remarkable composure. It impressed David even as it troubled him. No child should be so practiced at handling displacement. Later that evening, as Lily worked on her schoolwork at the dining table, David's phone rang. It was the cybersecurity expert he'd hired to decrypt Emily's files. "I've cracked the first layer of encryption," the woman reported. "What I'm seeing so far is concerning. Financial records, offshore accounts, transaction histories, all linked to Kozlov's organization. Emily was tracking their money," David realized. Not just tracking. She was documenting systematic money laundering through art purchases. Exactly. The kind of evidence that could extend Kozlov's sentence significantly. If she was gathering this while working at the museum, she would have had access to provenance records, buyer information. David finished, the pieces falling into place. "Can you send what you found securely?" "Not electronically. This is sensitive enough that I'd recommend an in-person exchange. I can come to you tomorrow." After ending the call, David found Lily watching him intently from the table, her homework temporarily forgotten. "That was about Mom's secret files, wasn't it?" she asked. David nodded, continuously surprised by her perceptiveness. "Yes, we're starting to understand what she was working on." "Is it dangerous?" "It could help keep us safe," David answered carefully. "Your mom was very smart. She left behind information that could protect us from the people she was worried about." Lily seemed to consider this before asking her next question. "Did you know anything about this when you were married to her?" The question cut to the heart of what David had been struggling with since discovering Emily's deception. "No," he admitted. "She kept this part of her life completely separate." "Because she was protecting you too," Lily said with conviction. "Mom always said that sometimes you have to keep secrets to keep people safe." David moved to sit across from her at the table. "Did she tell you that often?" Lily nodded. "When I asked why we didn't have friends or why we couldn't stay in one place, she said it was better if people didn't know too much about us." She paused, her small fingers tracing patterns on her notebook. "I didn't like it. I wanted to have friends, to stay in one school." "That must have been hard," David said gently. It was. Lily looked up at him, her expression serious beyond her years. "But now I understand why she did it. She was trying to stop bad people." David reached across the table, covering her small hand with his. Your mother was very brave. And so are you. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, David stood at the window overlooking the city lights, Emily's letter from the safe deposit box in his hand. He had read it dozens of times, searching for clues, for some deeper understanding of the woman he had loved. I created separate worlds because I couldn't risk connecting you to my past. The words still stung, yet he was beginning to understand the impossible choice Emily had faced. She had witnessed something terrible, done the right thing by testifying, and spent the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. Somehow in the midst of that fear, she had found room for love, for her daughter, for him, even if she couldn't fully integrate those parts of her life. Tomorrow would bring new information, perhaps new dangers, but tonight, watching over a sleeping child who was quickly becoming the center of his world, David finally felt something like peace with Emily's decisions. She had been protecting what mattered most. Now it was his turn to do the same. Morning brought a steady rain that drummed against the windows of the safe house, casting the apartment in a gray light that matched David's mood. The cybersecurity expert was due at noon, but David's anticipation was tempered by caution. Each new revelation about Emily's secret life had brought both clarity and complication, and he expected today would be no different. Lily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by colored pencils and paper. She had been drawing, since breakfast, intense, focused creations that David recognized as various homes she had shared with Emily. Each picture captured specific details: a cracked window, a flowering plant on a fire escape, a view of a particular street corner. It was as if she were documenting her history, preserving memories she feared might slip away. That's a lot of different places, David observed, kneeling beside her to examine the drawings. These are just the ones I remember best, Lily replied, without looking up. There were more. David studied the most recent sketch, a small apartment with a sloped ceiling and a window overlooking what appeared to be a park. Is this where you lived? At the end? Lily nodded, adding careful shading to the window. For 3 months. It was nice. Mom said maybe we could stay longer, but then she got sick. Did she tell you she was sick? David asked gently. Not at first. She tried to hide it, Lily's hand stilled over the paper. But I could tell. She got tired really fast and sometimes had trouble breathing. Then one day she couldn't get out of bed. David closed his eyes briefly, imagining Emily struggling alone, trying to protect Lily from the reality of her failing health while carrying the burden of her secret past. The neighbor called the ambulance, Lily continued, her voice small but steady. Mom made me promise to be brave before they took her away. She gave me her locket and told me never to take it off. I didn't see her again after that. The simple telling broke David's heart. While he had been notified immediately of Emily's hospitalization and had spent her final days by her side, Lily had been left alone, waiting for a mother who would never return. I'm so sorry, Lily, he said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. That must have been terrifying. She looked up at him finally, her expression more quizzical than sad. Why didn't she tell you about me? You could have helped us. The question pierced David's carefully maintained composure. It was the same one he had asked himself countless times since finding Lily at the cemetery. I think, he began slowly. She believed keeping us separate was the only way to keep us both safe. If the people she testified against ever tracked her down as Emily Wilson, they wouldn't find me. And if they ever connected her to Emily Reynolds, they wouldn't find you. But that meant we were both alone when she died. Lily pointed out with devastating logic. Yes, David admitted. That was the flaw in her plan. She probably thought she had more time to figure things out. The buzzer interrupted their conversation. The cybersecurity expert had arrived. David showed her in, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, who introduced herself simply as Mira. She carried a secure laptop and a determined expression. I've decrypted about 60% of the files, she explained once they were seated at the dining table, Lily continuing her drawing in the living room. What I've found is essentially a paper trail connecting Kozlov's organization to a major art forgery and money laundering operation. She opened her laptop, displaying a complex diagram of financial transactions, artwork provenance records, and shipping manifests. Emily, or Sarah rather, was documenting how the organization was purchasing legitimate artwork through auction houses, creating forgeries, selling the originals on the black market, and then discovering the forgeries to collect insurance. The money moves through offshore accounts, gets cleaned, and returns to their legitimate businesses. And she gathered all this while working in art restoration, David said, seeing how perfectly positioned Emily had been to notice these patterns. Exactly. She had access to examination records, authentication documents, everything needed to build this case. Mira's expression grew more serious. But there's something else. I found communications suggesting Kozlov suspected someone was tracking his operation. The last dated entry is from 3 weeks before Emily's death. David felt a chill run through him. You think they discovered what she was doing? I think it's a strong possibility. And if they did, the apartment's windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and debris, cutting off her words as the concussive force of an explosion rocked the building. David's military training, years old but deeply ingrained, took over instantly. He lunged across the room toward Lily, covering her small body with his as glass fragments rained down around them. Her drawings scattered in the blast of air that followed the explosion, colorful pages fluttering like wounded birds against the backdrop of chaos. Are you hurt? He demanded, quickly checking her for injuries. Lily shook her head, her eyes wide with shock but remarkably free of tears. The calm in those eyes unsettled David more than hysteria would have. It was the practiced reaction of a child too familiar with emergencies. Mira had already recovered her laptop and was shoving it into her bag. This wasn't random, she said, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. They found us. The building's fire alarm began its shrill wail, and the sounds of shouting and footsteps filled the hallway outside. David's mind raced. The explosion appeared to have originated from a neighboring apartment or the floor above. Not a direct attack on their unit, but close enough to serve as either a warning or a deadly mistake in targeting. We need to move, he said, helping Lily to her feet. Now. She reached immediately for her backpack, which sat by the sofa. My things. No time, David insisted, but seeing the flash of panic in her eyes, he relented. 30 seconds. Grab only what you absolutely need. While Lily quickly gathered her few precious possessions, David retrieved his own emergency bag, already packed with cash, documents, and burner phones, and checked the hallway through the peephole. Residents were evacuating, moving toward the stairwell in a chaotic stream. We'll blend with the crowd, he told Mira. Use the evacuation as cover. Get separated from us if you can. You'll be safer. Contact me through the secure channel when you're clear. She nodded, understanding the strategy. The evidence is still on the drive. I'll complete the decryption somewhere safe. David turned to Lily, who stood ready with her backpack, Emily's locket clutched tightly in her hand. Stay right beside me. If anything happens, if we get separated, you remember the code word? Paintbrush, she said immediately. Good. Don't go with anyone who doesn't know that word. He took her hand, marveling at the steadiness of her grip. Ready? She nodded once, resolve hardening her young features. They stepped into the hallway, immediately engulfed by the panicked flow of residents fleeing the building. David kept Lily close, one hand protectively on her shoulder as they moved with the crowd toward the stairs. Mira fell back, allowing herself to be separated as planned. The stairwell was congested with people, the descent slow and tense. David scanned constantly for threats, for anyone paying too much attention to them rather than focusing on escape. 3 floors down, he spotted a man moving against the flow, pushing upward with determined purpose, hand concealed inside his jacket. Change of plan, David whispered to Lily, guiding her to exit the stairwell at the next floor. They emerged into a residential hallway, momentarily empty as most residents had already evacuated. Where are we going? Lily asked, keeping pace with his rapid stride. Service elevator, David replied, navigating the hallways from memory. Less crowded. They rounded a corner and found the service area, its elevator miraculously operational despite the emergency. David pressed the call button repeatedly, acutely aware of their vulnerability in this isolated corridor. "Someone's coming," Lily warned, her sharp hearing detecting footsteps before David did. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, doors sliding open to reveal an empty car. David ushered Lily inside, pressing the button for the basement garage just as the unmistakable sound of running footsteps grew louder. As the doors began to close, a hand thrust through the gap, a man's hand wearing a distinctive ring with a red stone. David reacted instantly, striking the hand hard enough to force its withdrawal. The doors completed their closure, and the elevator began its descent. "Who was that?" Lily asked, her voice steady despite the danger. "I don't know," David admitted. "But the ring he was wearing? I've seen it before. In photos from Emily's USB drive. It's connected to Kozlov's organization." The elevator reached the garage level, doors opening onto the dimly lit parking area. David led Lily quickly between rows of vehicles, listening for pursuit. "I don't have a car here," he told her. "We'll need to improvise." "Like hot wiring?" Lily asked, surprising him. "Mom knew how to do that. She showed me once when we were in a hurry." David looked down at her with newfound amazement. "Your mother was full of surprises." "She said it was only for emergencies," Lily added seriously. "This definitely qualifies," David said, scanning the garage for a suitable vehicle. "Let's find a ride out of here." The stolen sedan rumbled beneath them as David navigated the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, putting distance between themselves and the apartment building. Police sirens wailed in the distance, emergency vehicles converging on the explosion site they'd left behind. In the passenger seat, Lily sat quietly, her backpack clutched to her chest like armor. "Are you okay?" David asked, glancing at her. Between careful checks of the rearview mirror, she nodded. "Where are we going?" It was the practical question of a child who had spent her life adapting to sudden changes. No tears, no panic, just the need to orient herself to their new reality. "Somewhere." "They won't look for us," David replied. "I have a cabin upstate, it's not in my name. Emily and I bought it through a shell company for weekend getaways." The irony wasn't lost on him. Emily had created a hidden retreat for their life together, even as she maintained another hidden life with Lily. Her compartmentalization had been absolute, painful as that was to acknowledge. "Will your friend be okay? The computer lady?" Lily asked as they crossed the George Washington Bridge, leaving the city behind. "Mira can take care of herself," David assured her, though his own concern lingered. "She knows how to disappear." They drove in silence for several miles, rain drumming steadily on the roof. David's mind raced with calculations. How Kozlov's people had found them, what resources he had left to protect Lily, whom he could still trust. "Why did Mom never tell you about her heart problem?" Lily asked suddenly, her question cutting through his strategic planning. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I don't know. I've been asking myself the same thing." "She took medicine sometimes," Lily continued. "Pills she kept hidden. When I asked about them, she said they were just vitamins. Another deception, another piece of Emily that had been hidden from him." "Did she see doctors?" Lily shook her head. "She didn't like doctors. Said they asked too many questions." She paused, fidgeting with the strap of her backpack. "The last few months she was really tired, had trouble climbing stairs. But she said it was just stress." David swallowed hard, imagining Emily struggling silently, aware her condition was worsening but unwilling to seek proper treatment. Perhaps she had feared medical records would somehow expose her dual identities, or perhaps the witness protection restrictions had complicated her access to specialized care. Whatever the reason, she had chosen secrecy over treatment, with fatal consequences. "I think," he said carefully, "your mom spent so long protecting other people that she forgot to protect herself." Lily considered this, her small face solemn in the glow of the dashboard lights. "Do you think she knew she was going to die?" The question caught David off guard. He wanted to offer reassurance, but something told him Lily deserved honesty. "I think she might have suspected. That's probably why she left the safe deposit box, and why she gave you the locket." "That's what I thought too," Lily said softly. "The last time I saw her, she hugged me differently. Longer, like she was saying goodbye." The simple observation pierced David's heart. This child had been forced to process not just loss but abandonment, left alone when Emily died because of secrets too dangerous to share. "Lily," he said, making a decision he hadn't consciously planned, "I want you to know something. No matter what happens, I'm not going to disappear on you. We're in this together now." She studied him with those penetrating eyes that seemed to search for truth beyond words. "Promise?" "I promise." The cabin appeared through the trees as they turned down a gravel drive, a sturdy structure of timber and stone nestled against the backdrop of forest. David parked behind it, concealing the car from the main road, and quickly ushered Lily inside. The interior was simple but comfortable, a great room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a loft. David secured the doors and windows before turning on minimal lights. "We should be safe here for a while," he told Lily, helping her settle her backpack on the worn leather sofa. "Not many people know about this place." "Did Mom like it here?" she asked, looking around at the rustic space. "She loved it," David said, memory softening his voice. "She said it was the only place where she could truly relax." Now he understood why. It had been the one location where Emily didn't have to maintain her dual identities, where she could simply exist without performance or division. In retrospect, those weekend retreats had probably been her only moments of genuine peace. "I think I would have liked it too," Lily said simply, running her hand along the back of the sofa. "If we had all been here together." 3 days at the cabin passed in an uneasy rhythm. David maintained constant vigilance, checking and rechecking security while reaching out through secure channels to his remaining trusted contacts. Lily adapted to their new environment with the resilience he had come to expect, exploring the cabin and surrounding woods during the day, helping prepare simple meals, asking thoughtful questions about Emily's time there. On the morning of the 4th day, David's secure phone buzzed with a message from Mira. "Decryption complete. Evidence ready. Meet tomorrow. Usual location. Noon." Relief flooded through him. With the fully decrypted evidence, they could approach federal authorities, potentially ending Kozlov's threat permanently. Just one more day of caution. One final meeting, and they might find their way to safety. "Good news?" Lily asked, observing his expression from where she sat sketching by the fireplace. "I think so," David replied. "My friend has finished analyzing your mom's files. We'll meet her tomorrow, then take everything to people who can help us." Lily nodded, returning to her drawing, a detailed rendering of the cabin, exact in its proportions and features. Her artistic talent was remarkable, another connection to Emily that sometimes made David's chest ache with recognition. That evening, as golden light filtered through the pine trees surrounding the cabin, David found Lily sitting on the porch steps, Emily's locket cradled in her palms. "I've been trying to figure out how to open it," she said as he settled beside her. "Mom said it was important, but it doesn't have a normal clasp." David studied the small silver heart. "May I?" he asked, and Lily handed it to him. He examined it carefully, noting subtle markings that might indicate a hidden mechanism. Recalling Emily's love of puzzles and secret compartments, a trait he had once found endearingly quirky but now recognized as part of her security consciousness, he pressed various points on the locket's surface. When he applied pressure to both the top and bottom simultaneously, a tiny click rewarded his efforts. The locket's face slid sideways rather than opening conventionally, revealing not a photograph but a small storage compartment containing a micro SD card. "Another secret," David murmured, carefully removing the tiny card. "What's on it?" Lily asked, eyes wide. "I'm not sure, but I think your mom left us one final message." Later, with Lily finally asleep in the cabin's loft bedroom, David inserted the micro SD card into his laptop. It contained a single video file, dated 2 weeks before Emily's death. His hand trembled slightly as he pressed play. Emily's face appeared on screen, pale and drawn, but determined. "David, Lily," she began, her voice steady despite the visible strain in her features. "If you're watching this together, then my worst fear and greatest hope have both come true. You've found each other." The familiar sound of her voice after a year of silence brought an unexpected flood of emotions. David paused the video, gathering his composure before continuing into whatever final truths Emily had left for them to discover. David pressed play, and Emily's voice filled the quiet cabin once more. "There's so much I need to explain," she continued, her image flickering slightly on the small screen. "First, to you, David, I'm sorry. The woman you married was real, even if her name and history weren't. Everything between us was true. I never intended to fall in love with you, to bring you into this complicated life, but I couldn't help myself." She paused, a familiar gesture of tucking hair behind her ear that made David's heart constrict. "Lily, my brave girl, I'm sorry too. For all the moves, the secrets, the explanations that never quite made sense. You deserved stability, friends, a normal childhood. I hope you'll understand someday that everything I did was to keep you safe." Emily shifted in her seat, visibly gathering strength to continue. "The evidence I've collected proves Kozlov's organization continued operating while he was in prison. With him being released, they'll become even more dangerous. The full evidence is in the files I've hidden, but this card contains something equally important. Leverage. Names of officials who've been compromised. Locations of assets even the federal authorities don't know about. A insurance policy, if you will." She leaned closer to the camera, her expression intensifying. "David, there's a federal agent named Catherine Reeves with the U.S. Marshals Service. She was my handler when I entered witness protection. She's the only one I ever trusted completely. Take the evidence to her, no one else. Her contact information is embedded in the metadata of this video." Emily's composure briefly faltered, emotion breaking through. "And now the hardest part. I've known about my heart condition for years. The doctor said it was congenital, that I would need surgery eventually. But surgery meant medical records, questions I couldn't answer, exposure I couldn't risk, while Kozlov's people were still searching. I made a choice to delay treatment to protect our safety." She touched her own chest lightly, just above her heart. "I can feel it getting worse. If you're watching this, I likely didn't make it to Kozlov's release date, but I've prepared as best I could. The evidence, this message, the contingencies, they're my legacy to you both." Emily wiped away a tear, straightening her shoulders with visible effort. "David, if Lily is with you now, it means you've become her protector. I know in my heart you'll care for her as I would. And Lily, trust David. He's a good man, the best I've known." She smiled then, a genuine smile despite the sadness in her eyes. "My greatest regret is that I couldn't bring my two worlds together while I was alive. But perhaps in this way, through this final truth, you can find a new beginning together. I loved you both, more than I could ever express. Be safe. Be brave. And when this is over, be happy." The screen went dark, Emily's face disappearing as abruptly as she had from their lives. David sat motionless, tears streaming down his face, the final pieces of Emily's puzzle falling into place. A small sound made him turn. Lily stood at the bottom of the loft stairs, clutching her blanket around her shoulders. "I heard her voice," she said simply. Morning brought a pale sun and renewed purpose. David extracted Agent Catherine Reeves's contact information from the video file metadata and placed a carefully worded call that confirmed she was still with the Marshals Service. They arranged to meet at noon, not at the usual location David had originally planned with Mira, but at a public park 30 miles away. If Kozlov's people had somehow intercepted his communications with Mira, the change in plans might give them an advantage. "Remember what I told you," David said as he helped Lily into a jacket he'd purchased from a roadside store, deliberately oversized to change her silhouette. "Stay close to me at all times. If anything happens, use the code word," Lily finished. "Only go with someone who knows its paintbrush." He nodded, securing a baseball cap over her dark hair. And if we get separated and you can't find me or Agent Reeves, use this." He handed her a small emergency phone, pre-programmed with a single number. "It will connect you directly to my security team." Lily accepted the phone solemnly, tucking it into her pocket without question. Her trust in him had grown steadily over their time together, a precious thing David was determined to honor. The drive to the meeting location was tense, David constantly checking for surveillance or pursuit. They arrived early, giving him time to survey the park, noting exits and potential cover. Lily stayed by his side, her eyes scanning their surroundings with the same tactical awareness, a child taught by circumstance to always be vigilant. At precisely noon, a woman in a gray suit approached their bench. She was in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the alert posture of someone accustomed to authority. "Mr. Reynolds," she said without preamble, her gaze shifting to Lily with a flash of recognition. "And you must be Lily." "Agent Reeves," David acknowledged. "Emily, Sarah, said you were the only one we could trust." Catherine Reeves's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Sarah Cassidy was one of the bravest witnesses I ever worked with. Her testimony put Kozlov away when no one else would speak against him." She knelt to Lily's level. "You look just like her." Lily studied the agent carefully. "Did you know my mom before she changed her name?" "I did. I helped her become Emily Wilson and start her new life." Reeves straightened, addressing David again. "You said you have evidence?" David removed a sealed envelope from his jacket. "Everything Emily collected about Kozlov's continuing operations. Names, dates, financial transactions. Enough to send him back to prison for decades." As Agent Reeves reached for the envelope, David noticed a black SUV pulling up to the park entrance, its windows tinted, its approach too deliberate to be coincidental. "We may have company," he warned, nodding toward the vehicle. Reeves followed his gaze, her posture shifting subtly too. "Readiness. Give me the evidence and take Lily to the restrooms at the far end of the park. There's a service entrance behind them. I have agents stationed nearby. We'll cover your exit." David hesitated. Years of trust issues warring with Emily's explicit faith in this woman. "Paintbrush," Agent Reeves said quietly, her eyes steady on his. The code word, which he had never shared with her, made the decision clear. Emily had trusted her completely enough to share their emergency protocols. "Go," he told Lily, guiding her toward the path as two men emerged from the SUV. "We're going to be okay." For the first time since they'd met, Lily reached for his hand, without prompting, her small fingers interlacing with his as they walked briskly away, trusting Emily's final plan to lead them to safety. 6 months later, the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights felt truly like home for the first time since Emily's death. The formal living room had been transformed with colorful throw pillows and a child-sized art desk by the window. Framed drawings hung alongside fine art on the walls, Lily's work proudly displayed as Emily would have wanted. David stood in the doorway, watching as Lily arranged flowers on the coffee table, white lilies, Emily's favorite. Today marked 18 months since her passing, their second cemetery visit together. "Ready?" he asked softly. Lily nodded, carefully adjusting the final bloom. "Do you think she'd like these?" "She'd love them," David assured her. The drive to Greenwood Cemetery was peaceful, so different from their first meeting in this place. Kozlov was back in prison, his organization dismantled by the evidence Emily had painstakingly gathered. Catherine Reeves had kept her promise, protecting them through the investigation and legal proceedings, ensuring their safety as the case concluded. They walked together along the familiar path, Lily's hand comfortably in David's, their steps in natural rhythm. The headstone had been changed, now reading Emily Wilson Reynolds with the addition of Sarah Cassidy in smaller letters beneath, acknowledging all parts of the remarkable woman who had connected them. Lily placed the lilies gently at the base of the stone while David stood quietly beside her. After a moment, she reached into her pocket and withdrew the silver locket, now empty of its secret but no less precious. "I think Mom would be happy now," she said, running her thumb over the engraved heart. "We're not in danger anymore. We're together." David knelt beside her, adjusting his tie, the same one he'd worn to court last month when the adoption was finalized. I think you're right. They stayed a while longer, sharing memories of Emily that had become easier to discuss with time. The pain had softened, making room for understanding and even forgiveness for the impossible choices she had made. As they walked back toward the cemetery gates, the autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet, Lily looked up at David with Emily's eyes in a face that was increasingly showing her own unique spirit. "Thank you for finding me," she said simply. David smiled, his heart full. "No, Lily. Thank you for finding me." Together, father and daughter by choice rather than blood, they stepped from the place of memories into the promise of their shared future, the most valuable legacy Emily had left behind.